I'm gonna hand you.
Do you want? It doesn't need anything but to be pushed.
I'm gonna hand you the mic. You have to kind of put it pretty close to your mouth. It'll be happy. You have to get it close.
Well, we're going to get this party started.
And this is for you.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. And as the director of the Nebraska Public Library, I appreciate all of you attending. We do have, if the Friends members put their card in, you get this lovely plate of kolaches for the lucky winner. And that was Joanne Lufert. So wherever Joanne is. Okay. So we'll pass this back to Joanne and see if she gets it.
Take one and pass it on.
Welcome to the 6th program in the Towns of the County series, co-sponsored by the Nebraska Memorial Library and the Butler County Historical Society. In 1873, the early settlers of Butler County wisely voted that the county seat should be centrally located, and David City was born. If not for the towns of Butler County, David City would not even exist. That is why we are celebrating the county seat of David City's 150th anniversary with these programs about the 12 incorporated towns of Butler County. Thanks to these towns, David City has thrived. The presenters of this series are people who live in and are proud of their towns. We owe them our thanks for creating and presenting these programs. Giving a program isn't easy. We ask that you please hold your questions until the end of their presentation, and also, please, I beg of you, silence your cell phones. Please, please, please. They are taping this for the future, so please turn them off or vibrate or whatever you need to do, but please turn them off. And now let's hear about the history of the town of Brainard. We are proud to introduce to you Carolyn Dworick and Sharon Bruner.
Okay, good evening and welcome to our program about Brainard. Sharon Bruner and I will tag team on this presentation. My name is Carolyn Dworick and I grew up on a farm a few miles northeast of Brainard. My great-grandparents came to Butler County in the 1870s and 1880s. They were the families of Rada, Rhett, Yanok, and Hladky, as did my husband Leonard's ancestors, the families of Dvorak, Kovalets, Divish, and Zavodny. I will start with a brief history of the first settlement in Oak Creek Township, also known as the town of Urban. In 1865, James D. and Phoebe Crowley Brown, with their family of 13 children, ages 1 through 23, and other families came by wagon train from Ray County, Missouri, intending to go on to Oregon. They received word that because of the Indians out west, it would be unsafe to proceed further. 5 families decided to take homesteads in Oak Creek Township, Section 23, which was about 3.5 miles southeast of the present-day town of Brainard. Some members of their wagon train went on to Oregon, and some were never heard from again. A dugout served as their very first school. Later, they built a frame schoolhouse, a general store, a church, and a post office. The church would later serve as Oak Creek Country School District number 6 until about 1960. A 1-acre Brown family cemetery was established in 1886, and there are 73 known burials in that cemetery. When James and Phoebe Brown died in 1904, they left each of their 13 children $8,500 and 80 acres of land. The southern plantation-style house that the Browns built is still standing. After James and Phoebe died, the place was sold to Innocence and Mary Brodaszewski. Then, in 2003, it was sold to Gary and Kathy Samuelson, who did extensive repairs and expanded the house and even planted a large vineyard. They operated Pheasant Oaks Vineyard for a few years. For the past 5 years, Robert and Jessica Owens are the current homeowners and are calling it home. A side note, Steve and Diane Makovichka also had a vineyard in near Brainard, about 1 mile east of town up until a few years ago. Okay, Thomas Logan is considered to be the founder of Brainard. He was a Civil War veteran born in Pennsylvania. He homesteaded in Section 10 in 1875. A year later, he purchased the southwest quarter of Section 17 from the Union Pacific Railroad after it arrived in Brainard. He built a home and then established a dry goods store, it being the first store in town. He married Frances Emmeline Brown in 1878. His brother, Matthew Logan, established a grocery store, and soon after, a post office, a blacksmith shop, and drugstore, and several homes were constructed on the west side of Lincoln Street, adjacent to the UP Railroad. Now, I would like to introduce a special guest to you. She is the great-great-granddaughter of James and Phoebe Brown, and she's the grandniece of Thomas and Emma Logan. Please welcome Cheryl Pinio from Rising City.
Thank you for having me here tonight. I only discovered this part of my family when I was probably 25 years old or something, and my mother and aunt did some genealogy, and we went over and visited the cemetery and the home, and it's just been an honor to be invited tonight. Appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to thank the town and community of Brainard for taking care of the family cemetery. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. In 1861, rancher David Reed and his wife Jane Elizabeth started a ranch in Section 5, which is in the upper right-hand corner, Section 5, for freighters on the trail near Brainard. Here they remained for 6 years in their 4-room log house, isolated from society, but dispensing provisions for the moving caravans that were crossing the plains. In 1867, they pulled up and they moved to a home on the Blue River near Surprise. Okay, in Section 10, in the upper right, well, in the middle there, is Thomas Logan, where he first settled in 1875, Section 10. Section 23 is the Brown family settlement. Section 17 is where Logan bought the land from the railroad and founded the town of Brainard. In the early 1890s, the business district began to move from the Lincoln Street 1 block over west onto Madison Street. Brainard's population in 1928 reached a height of 468 residents. Currently, our population is about 340. Early settlers in this area were of English and German origin. By the 1870s, a large influx of Czech pioneers began to settle here. Some of the early Czech settlers were Slavic, Gaborek, Dvorek, Semin, and Jacob. In the 1870s, a few Dutch farmers settled west of town. Brainard is located in the southeastern Butler County, on the banks of the Oak Creek and near the Oxbow Trail. It was because of the railroad coming through this area that Brainard was established in 1877, but not platted until the following year. The railroad named the town after David Brainard, a New York missionary to the Indians. Now I'd like to read a newspaper clipping written just 10 years after Brainard was founded. In the immigrant issue of the Lincoln State Journal on Sunday, June 5th, 1887, was written, Brainard, situated in Butler County on the Union Pacific Railroad, 34 miles from Lincoln, population 350. It is in the center of the prosperous agriculture and stock raising district. Some of the finest farms of the state are being located in this vicinity. The business houses are as follows: 4 general stores, 1 grocery, 1 restaurant, 2 drugstores, 2 livery stables, 1 harness shop, 2 hotels, 1 coal and lumber yard, 1 butcher shop, 2 hardware stores, 3 stock and grain dealers, 1 general shipper, 3 blacksmiths, 2 physicians, 5 carpenters, 3 saloons, and 1 bank. Now I will tell you a bit about some of those businesses on the east side of the main street, starting from the south end, and I'll go north. I'll try to be as brief as possible because there are so many businesses to talk about. I will talk first about their early history and then the current history where applicable. This was the dentist office of Dr. S.H. Jelinek, who came to Brainard from Crete in 1911. He practiced in Brainard for 56 years. He had one of the first x-ray machines in the area. Other medical personnel in town in the early days were Dr. James Marin, a physician who practiced here from the early 1900s to 1933. Dr. O.C. Kramberg, a physician and surgeon who came here in 29 and moved to North Platte in the 40s. Then there was also a Dr. B.W. Drasky, a Dr. Howell, Dr. William G. Harriger. He was a Civil War veteran. After the war, he finished his medical studies in Canada and came to Brainard in about 1877. Brainard had 2 pharmacists, Theodore Smersh, who came to Brainard in 1885 and stayed for 50 years, and Glenn Kramberg. Kramberg said that oftentimes people would barter for prescription drugs and other goods. I guess that was probably a common practice in those days. I have no photos of this story, but I'd like to mention that back then, Brainard was home to many Czech bands, such as the Smersh Band, John Deuce Band, Anton Sedlak Orchestra, Fred C. Semin Orchestra, and later the Fred A. Semin Municipal Band. Currently, Lonnie Pitts of rural Brainard has a very popular band called the Leo Lonnie Orchestra. Another rural Brainard man, John Fensel, has a band called Silas Creek. Next to the dentist office was a brick building constructed in about 1900. It served as Dr. Marin's office, then as W.M. Blondie Wesley's barbershop, restaurant, pool hall, and confectionery. Later, his sons, Manley and Robert Wesley, had the cafe there. Manley Wesley became a state senator from Brainard, and as I understand, the Wesleys also had a cheese and ice cream factory in town. In 1951, Anton and Eleanor Egger purchased the cafe, calling it Egger's Cafe, and operated it until 1975. 2 years later, the name was changed to CB Bar when Egger's daughter, Charlotte, and her husband, Bill Schwander, ran the cafe, up until Bill suddenly died in 1997. Then there was a string of short-term owners, and somewhere during that time, the cafe was expanded to include the co-op building next door. This created a spacious dining room for the cafe. Currently, the business is owned by Lori Rutkovets, and the new operators of the Alley Cat Bar and Grill are Corey and Allison Arnold. On the corner of this block sits the brick building built by Anton Bruner and James Cabela in 1898. They opened a grocery business together. After a short time, they sold out to Frank Semi. Cabela built another building and became associated with W.F. Kaborek in the hardware business. In about 1912, they sold out and moved their stock of goods to Dwight. There again, Cabela sold out and moved back to Brainard. In about 1940, this building also served as Ed Rasky's garage, where he sold Ford tractors and farm machinery. In about the 60s, Farmers Union Oil purchased the building as a hardware store and gas station. It eventually became part of the Frontier Co-op, and later they moved their goods to their new headquarters located by the railroad tracks. Now, the old co-op store is part of the cafe next door. In the next block on the corner was the Deuce Saloon and Opera House, constructed in the early 1900s. Dances and wrestling matches attracted many people to this establishment. In the 1920s, Adolph and Henry Biglick purchased the business as a saloon, pool hall, and movie theater. In 48, Sylvester Shonka opened a grocery and hardware store, and in 1961, Dwayne and Ed Rasky bought the building as a showroom for their Honda motorcycle shop. Now, it is used for storage by the Rasky family. East of the Deuce Saloon was Joe Zickman's blacksmith shop, and to the east of that was his farm implement shop, which he and his wife Anna conducted for 25 years. In the 1920s, Louis Mirgel built this building for his blacksmith shop. This building was recently purchased by Alex Beshik to be used as a private workshop. In the early 1960s, Butler County was home to two famous Czech wrestlers, Hugo Autobulik from David City and Joe Zickman from Brainard. Joe was referred to as the wrestling mayor of Brainard. He won the World Heavyweight Championship from Ed the Strangler Lewis in Boston in 1923, and he held on to that championship for 90 days. Later, he spent 29 years wrestling, and he had over 1,200 matches. While being a professional wrestler, he was also the mayor of Brainard for 12 years, and during that time, he established the water system and street lighting system in town, and he was very active promoting rural electrification of Nebraska. Zickman also built by hand this World War I memorial located in front of the American Legion building. This native stone weighs about 5 tons. It has a large plaque with the names of all the native sons that served in World War I. Later, plaques were installed honoring veterans who served in World War II, the Korean War, and the Veteran War, the Vietnam War. Okay, just east of the blacksmith shop was the implement building of Joe Zickman. In 1937, Frank Kujelka and Alvin Soka purchased it, and there they sold John Deere tractors and equipment. During that time, the farmers were slowly transitioning from horsepower to machine power. In 1946, Kujelka recalled that they traded in 92 horses and sold 36 tractors. The business was eventually dissolved, and in 1954 it was sold to Tom Lyons of David City. He moved his family to Brainard to take over the business. Now the building is used for storage. Incidentally, on this corner is where Thomas Logan established his first general store. Now back to Main Street. This building on the right was constructed in 1915 by John Usmara and was originally the Liddy Ford Garage. Later, Ed Rasky Sr. established the Rasky Motor Company, which his sons Dwayne and Ed Rasky eventually took over. They initially sold Studebakers and did automotive repair. In about the 60s, the brothers started their Honda motorcycle dealership and expanded their business into the Deuce Corner. They also expanded on the other side into the former Manly Wesley Barber Shop, which at one time used to be a pool hall operated by Edwin Favorina. Out on Highway 92, 2 miles east of town, was Ray's Hilltop Station and Cafe, started in 1933 by Ray Dworak. From a small wooden building, he sold gas, cold sandwiches, and beer. Ray soon asked his younger brother Oscar to partner with him, and they began the Dworak Oil Company. They built a new 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service station and cafe in 1963. They had a tank wagon service and sold farm implements also. Ray's son, Ron, drove the tank wagon delivering fuel to farms in Butler and Saunders County for over 40 years. When he started in 1966, gas was 29 cents a gallon and diesel was 15 cents a gallon. In 41, the Dworaks purchased the International Harvester franchise on Main Street and called it Dworak Motors. Along with brother Woodrow, they had a Chrysler Plymouth dealership for 27 years and also did tractor, truck, and car repairs. It ceased operation in about 1984 and the building has since been demolished. The present-day station out on Highway 92 is now owned by the Fordick family and used as a personal workshop. Note, during the Cold War, 1960 to 85, an intercontinental ballistic missile site was dug and maintained across the highway from the Dworak station. After the Cold War, Vic Boslowski operated a hog confinement and a feed store at that location. Now this site is in the possession of the Pillen family farms and is known as DNA Genetics. This brick building was built in about 1918 by Ed Reck, where he sold Case machinery. Later, Jim Fuchsa sold farm machinery and supplies at this location. Then Dr. Glenn Marin had Dr. Glenn Cranberg had a drugstore until about 1951, when Ray Duchatko operated Your Pal, a fishing rod holding factory, for a few years. Maybe some of you might still have one of those fishing rod holders in your possession. You're shaking your head. Do you?
Yeah.
My husband used to, but it got lost someplace. Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, later Tom Lyons purchased this building and operated a John Deere repair shop. In 1974, Spark Electric located here and is still doing business, commercial and residential electrical work. Original owners of Spark Electric were Gerald Schwanda and Laverne Fortick. Currently, the business is owned and operated by Schwanda's daughter, Lynn, and her husband, Steve Hummel. In 1915, after moving back from Dwight, James Cabela constructed this brick building to house a hardware, furniture, and dry goods store. He operated there until about 1929, when he sold out to Jim Fuchsa. Another side note, the renowned sporting goods stores, Cabela's World Foremost Outfitters, has its family roots in Brainard. James and Barbara Duma Cabela are the grandparents of brothers Dick and Jim Cabela, who started the Cabela retail stores, of which there are currently 80 in the United States and in Canada. Okay, same building. Adolph and Henry Bidlick purchased the Cabela building in the 1940s and converted it into a tavern, which was later run by Robert Pitlick. In '67, it was sold to Leo and Alice Beanie. Jim and Josie Belshon acquired it in 1969 and operated as Belshon's Husker Bar until 1977. It was sold to Clayton Castle in 1991 to house equipment and supplies for his catering business. He completely remodeled the building. Today, CK Catering is still doing a booming business from this location. Built in 1902, this building once housed Joe Rook's Meat Market. In 1913, Rudy Stuniak and Joe Jacob bought the meat market and grocery store. By 1934, Rudy's sons, Ernest and Frank Stuniak, were running the business. In '71, this building was sold and opened up into the tavern next door, also as a dining room. In about 1960, Frank Stuniak built a slaughterhouse on the northwest corner of town. It was later sold to a pizza making company and then to Don and Arlene Lemke, who named it Brainard Meats. In 2001, Carl Rezach and Dennis Bohach took over. Now it is solely owned by Dennis Bohach, who does custom slaughtering and processing. He offers a variety of frozen retail meats and other items. He specializes in Ithernisse and Jellica, which are Czech sausages. This two-story building was erected in about 1902 as the Sokop and Petržilka Saloon. Over the years, it also had many different owners. Jim Sepal owned the adjacent little wooden white building, which served as a dance hall next door. Many of you may remember that tavern when Joe and Betty Pekarik operated it as Peck's Corner, and then later Bruce and Ann Fulton, who had Fulton's Corner Bar. Later, the tavern building was owned privately, and sadly, it had to be torn down in about 2021. Okay, Sepul's Dance Hall was replaced in 1911 with this four-section brick building constructed by John Ort for Joe Sepul, who operated an automobile dealership here. And later on, it was occupied by the fire department. In 1979, Rich and Jody Gans bought and remodeled part of the building into Husker Bar 2. Sadly, Rich passed away on December 31st, 2020, and since that time, Jody has continued to run the bar, which serves good food and drinks 7 days a week. She is proud to possess the longest owned Class C liquor license in Butler County, now going on 44 years. The Bank of Brainard was founded in 1886 by A.K. Smith of Rutland, Vermont, and Tom McKnight, a realtor in town. Their first office was this land office building located where the water tower now stands. Later, they built a new bank building across the street. That was in about 1900. Sharon will tell you more about the bank when it moved to its new location on the west side of Main Street. Currently, this old bank building serves as the Brainard City Hall, and our current chairman of the board is Joel Verbka. In 1916, Joe and John Pozdersky built this beautiful building and operated a tailor shop here until 1920. Later, John Albin operated a printing shop here where he printed the Brainard Clipper newspaper. He took over the paper in 1914, and later his son, F.E. Pete Albin, took over up until 1951 when he sold the newspaper to the People's Banner. Actually, the Brainard Clipper was started in 1897 by William McGaffin. In about 1978, Thomas Beshek purchased the Clipper building and remodeled it into a laundromat. 20 years later, he remodeled the building to accommodate a hair salon. Since 1997, Julie Reimer's Classic Cuts has been in a very busy beauty shop, and Julie specializes in perms, coloring, and hair colors for men, women, and children. Her services are greatly appreciated. The Talbot Hotel was erected in 1898, and later on it was enlarged because they needed more rooms. Mary Talbot was a proprietress from the early 1900s to about 1932. She offered first-class meals and accommodations. Room rates were $2 a day. The hotel was demolished in about 1984. Mary Talbot raised her grandson, Lyle Talbot, at the hotel after his mother, Florence Talbot Henderson, died of typhoid fever. Lyle's father, Ed Henderson, was employed with the traveling vaudeville and theater company, and Grandma Talbot didn't approve of Ed's travels, so she filed for legal custody of Lyle and changed his last name to Talbot. Lyle had an early interest in acting. As a young boy, he would put on plays for his young friends in Grandma Talbot's cow barn. Otto Holishewski recalls that Lyle would charge them a penny to see his shows. And Lyle became part of the early Hollywood scene, signing up with Warner Brothers Studios, where Darryl Zanuck from Wahoo was the studio boss. From the late 1920s to 1960, Lyle appeared in over 200 movies. Mr. Talbot had a very successful career in theater, movies, and television. He was in hundreds of TV shows from 1950 through the 80s, including 11 years on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He played Joe Randolph, their neighbor. For 5 years, he played Paul Fonda on the Bob Cummings Show, and in 1987, at the age of 85, he appeared on the Bob Newhart Show, where he played a wealthy 100-year-old man who dropped dead after blowing out the candles on his birthday cake. Literally, that was the end to his 70-plus years in show business. This lot was occupied by Posvar's department store up until it burned down in 1907. Then a barber shop and Rada's shoe repair excuse me, were located here. Now it is the location of the American Legion Radar Post 273, which was chartered in October of 1920. This building was constructed in '54 and an addition was added in '82. It is named after First Class Anton J. Rada, who was the first soldier from the area to be killed in World War I. He died September 1, 1918, in battle in France and is buried there. The war ended 1 month later on November 11, 1918. Currently, the Legion has 60 members. The commander is Jim Bolivka. The American Legion Auxiliary Ladies have 52 members. Their president, Donna Steger, currently passed away. The auxiliary is celebrating their 95th anniversary this year. This corner once housed the home produce, and now it is the fire hall. It was constructed here in 1979 with volunteer labor and donations. 100 years ago, the Brainard Volunteer Fire Department was organized at a meeting on January 2nd, 1923. Their first fire truck was a converted 1924 Oldsmobile chassis with $1,570 worth of fire apparatus. Today, the volunteer fire department is very up to date and is well equipped with 30 firemen dedicated to protecting the town and surrounding areas whenever they're called upon. In 1916, the ZCBJ, a Czech fraternal organization, built this hall, which was constructed by John Ort. It has served as a meeting place, gymnasium, roller skating ring, playhouse, dance hall, and movie theater. It even has dressing rooms behind the stage. The 3 remaining curtains for the large stage are still in good condition. 2 of them are shown here. In about 1970, the Rasky brothers purchased the hall and used it as a storage facility. In 2021, Tim Pellon purchased the building and is currently using it as a private venue. The United Methodist Church was organized in May 1887. At that time, Brainard was largely a Protestant community, but because of the large influx of Czech Catholics, the church lost membership and was closed for a few years. But throughout the years, it managed to stay open, and they've had several renovations and upgrades made to the church. Currently, Pastor Dale Coates is serving the congregation of about 30 members. This concludes my Brainard Eastside Business District. Now I will turn the mic over to Sharon Bruner. Thank you very much.
I'd like you to meet my special guest, Genevieve Verbka Bean. She's known as Jenny by all of us who work with her and love her. My first contact with Jenny was in kindergarten at District 35, and from that day on, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. Jenny, please share your special memories. You're gonna sit. Okay, sounds good.
Hello, everybody. I don't have it all written out, so I'm just gonna tell you what I know. I didn't grow up in Brainard. I grew up on a farm about 4 miles southwest of Brainard. And I had a loving father and mother and a younger brother, about 1.5 years younger than I was or am anyway. And when we got old enough to go to school, we went to the country school about 1 mile away, and for a couple years. And then after that, we went to town to Holy Trinity for a couple years. Then we went back to the country school again for a couple of years, and we ended our elementary school education at Holy Trinity. Some will get little stories there. Now, those of you that are old enough and have no history, that our country schools were built on a 1 acre of prairie land, you know. And so we had plenty place to play. We ran around, we played ball. We played handy-eye over the coal shed. Do you remember that, some of you? and then, but when we went to the Catholic school and it got warmer weather, so we could, after winter, if the weather was getting warm, we could go outside to play. Well, lo and behold, the boys came to school carrying a bag of marbles. And, well, of course, that was different to us because we didn't have marbles out in the country school, you know. And so these marbles were made of glass and they were pretty, and they would go in front of the Holy Trinity was a small playground. So they'd go out there and get down on their hands and knees and make a big circle, and they'd put a big marble in the middle, and the little boys put their marbles in there. And the idea was each boy had a bigger marble, and they would use, those were called shooters, and you used it with your thumb and your index finger, and you were trying to shoot your neighbor's marble out of the ring, and then you got to keep that marble. Well, they didn't really keep them for sure, but I mean, that was like a score, you know. And then if you were lucky, you could do it again. But if you missed and it didn't go out of this ring, then the next little boy, he got to try it out with his shooter. And then when the recess bell rang, well, whoever had the most marbles was the winner of that game. And so that's what the boys did. The little girls, they would bring a box of jacks. Now, jacks were made of metal, and they were only about this big. There were 10 of them in a box, and they had 6 points to them. And a rubber ball went with them, and it was just a little ball. It was probably in diameter a little more than a quarter, and you toss those 10 jacks out, and you toss the ball up, and it was allowed only 1 bounce. But while that ball was up in the air, you had to pick a jack and put it beside you. And you were down on your hands and knees, just like the little boys were when they were playing their marbles. And if you were successful, then you kept doing it, you know, one by one by one. But if the ball bounced more than once, you were done. So then the next little girl, she got to scoop up the jacks, throw them out, and try the same thing, you know. But what amazed us farm kids was when the town kids brought their roller skates to school. Oh my gosh. And they attached them to their shoes, and they'd go skating all around. And Holy Trinity had sidewalks, concrete sidewalks, all around the building. And boy, that sure looked like fun, you know? Well, some of us coaxed our folks to buy us some skates too, so we could learn how to roller skate. So that was, and that always impressed me. Every time we went to Holy Trinity, how you could tell when spring had sprung at Holy Trinity because of the marbles, the jacks, and the roller skates. Well, this was in the middle 30s. That's a long time ago, you know? The next story is up a little few years in the beginning of the 1940s. And I was a freshman in high school. And that was the year Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Well, everything changed from then on. And so, you know, the draft came, boys and men were being drafted in the military, and there was just lots of changes. And we had bomber plants, and in Meade we had an ammunition plant, and people were going there to work, and remember, this is the time when farmers still were using horses. Very few had a tractor, and a lot of harvesting was done labor intensively by hand, you know. And they always were able to go uptown and hire some people to help them out, but there were no people to hire anymore. So this was getting really serious. And here it is getting corn picking time. And now what? I don't know who thought this one up, but they thought, you know what? We got all these kids in school. You know what? Let's declare a 2-week vacation from school and get all these kids, town kids and farm kids, everybody out there to pick that corn. And they did. So I just know my story. We did it too. We had a rather small farm, and my dad always rented some acres of land from some nearby neighbor. And that year he had rented a 60-acre patch that was a little more than a mile away from our home. So we get these 2 weeks off, and you know, he thought, I'll get that faraway patch done while the kids are home. So we did. So we started out early in the morning. I mean early, because this was October or November. I don't remember exactly, you know, if it was 2 weeks in October and 2 in November or 1 in 1, I don't know exactly. But the days are shorter. So we started out early in the morning, and it was dark. If there wasn't a moon, it was dark. There were, you know, now you go out in the country, there's yard lights all over the place, right? But there were no yard lights then. We didn't get REA till 1947, so it's dark. So we're going down the road with 2 pairs of horses, 2 wagons. My dad and I were in one, and Mother and my brother were in the one behind us. And we went out to that 60-acre patch. We got out there, and it was already starting to get light. And so, and I don't remember this either, how many rows we took at a time. I think probably about 3. And this 60-acre patch, those rows were half a mile long. You know, picking ear by ear for half a mile was a job, believe me. But we did it, and I remember too the frost on the stalks. When you got there, it was all frosty. And then as the day warmed up and the sun came out, it started to melt, and your gloves got wet and cold. So you always took several pairs of gloves extras along. And then when we got to that half a mile to turn around and come back, we stopped for a few seconds, and we each had an apple for our mid-morning lunch, you know. And then we headed back the other way to the road. And when we got there, then we went back home, that mile back home, and it was close to lunchtime already. So my brother and my dad emptied the wagons, got the corn into the corn pile, and Mother and I went in the house and stoked up the fire in the cook stove, which she had early in the morning stoked up really good and put a chicken or something in the oven, because there was something in there that was done. It just needed rewarming. And then when they got the wagons unloaded, they had to take care of the horses, feed them and water them. And we had lunch in the house and cleaned up a little bit, and then for the afternoon, back we went, out again, there and back on that half a mile rows. And this was day after day for 2 weeks. Once in a while, you had a rainy day when you didn't go out there. Mom kind of liked that because it helped her catch up on the laundry. I mean, she was with us all the time, you know? And there was work, it was sitting at home, the house was getting dusty and nothing you could do about it. The corn had to be picked, that's all there was to it. So, anyway, I just kind of think that the kids of nowadays ought to hear this. And see if they would do that, because that's a job. You know, you have to pull that ear off the stalk, husk it, and fling it into the wagon. And should you have overthrown that ear over the bagboard on the other side of the wagon, guess what? Dad said, go find that ear and get it into the wagon. Because remember, we're just getting off of the drought, and you know, every ear was precious, really precious. So anyway, that's my story for the day.
Always interesting to hear about the good old days, especially when you can remember some of those days very well. Well, I'm Sharon Bruner, and I'm doing the west side of Main Street. A few important places in town and throwing in some interesting aspects of the village of Brainard. I'm a lifelong resident of the Brainard area. I grew up 3 miles west of town in the area known as El Vernal, or the Hollander Settlement. St. Francis Catholic Church, also known as Center, was built in 1879 at the cost of $1,200. The church burned in 1905, and the present church was built in 1914. Some of the last names of the original settlers were Bongers, Fox, Vanderloop, Zagers, Vandenberg, Eiding, and many more from the country of Holland. I attended Brainard High School and was a member of the last graduating class in 1961. Also, I married my high school sweetheart, Jim Bruner, a few years later, but that's another story. Okay, beginning at the south end of Madison Street is East Butler School. Actually, it began as District 72 in June of 1882 with 39 students in a building just west of the present post office. The next year there were 84 students in grades K through 10. The last class in this building was 1938. After the building was torn down, it became the Free Showgrounds, and now it's the residence of Fred and Sue Boger. In 1935, the Forrest Wilson Construction Company began work on the main part of the Brainard building, and it still remains in use, with many additions through the years. Several classroom additions, a wrestling room, a new gym, an ag shop, music room, and most recently the commons area and a new kitchen provide rooms for 300 students, with a pre-kindergarten through 4th grade located in Dwight. East Butler became one of the first consolidated schools in Nebraska in 1962. The reorganization combined rural and village districts from Loma, Brainard, and Dwight. Other students now come from David City, Bee, Weston, Ulysses, Prague, Valparaiso, and other rural areas. Maroon and gold and white continue to be the school colors. The Tigers are involved in many sporting events, music, and organizations such as the FFA, Skills USA, FCCLA, and others. One of the famous graduates was Ed Sport Vondra, who scored 102 points in Class H basketball team's victory over Raymond High School. Vondra also set the Nebraska state record for the most points scored by one person. That same year, the team became Brainard's first state champion with a 12-8 win over Bladen in 1922. This is a picture of the team members. The Makovica brothers of Nebraska football fame attended East Butler, as well as many other important people who claimed Brainard as their home. The city park was originally made with the equipment made by Ed and Dwayne Rasky in 1954. There was a wooden bandstand about 10 feet off the ground, and maybe some of you remember the wonderful summer concerts on Saturday evenings directed by Fred A. Semi. The city park was updated in 2000 with new playground equipment. Park benches have been donated in memory of the residents. The present bandstand was constructed in 2002. The funds were donated by Ann Semming-Smith in memory of her parents, Fred and Evelyn Semming. Fred and his father, Fred C. Semming, were longtime community and East Butler band directors. Pictured are Ann Semming-Smith and her family at one of the concerts during the Q125 celebration in July of 2003. She was a 1961 graduate of Brainard High School. A cover for the bandstand is in the works at the present time. 2 years ago, the park was renovated and made handicapped accessible. The shelter in City Park is used for a variety of entertainment, including the Pearl Snaps, who were entertaining at the Q125. It is a perfect spot to sit and have lunch or sit and visit on a sunny afternoon while the children play. A block west of the city park is Evergreen Park, which originally had 20 grain storage bins leased by the ASCS. In 1974, Charles and Ilva Novak, retired banker, bought the property and cleared it. They hauled in 25 loads of black dirt, planted flowers, shrubs, trees, and added a redwood fence and other decorations. They took care of the park for over 20 years. A major cleanup by community volunteers was held in 1991 with a new fence, new flower beds, trimming of trees, and removal of dead trees. A sand pit was made for sand volleyball. Most recently, a gaga pit, a pickleball court, which is used many nights out of the week. Believe me, we live right next to it. They're out there with that, beating a ball around. Disc golf course and other improvements have been added thanks to the Community Summit for Active People, Healthy Brainard. The park is frequently used by children and campers in this peaceful setting. The Veterans Memorial was constructed in Evergreen Park and dedicated on November 18, 2018. At the present time, there are 321 names on the memorial. The front panel has the American Legion emblem and the emblems of the 5 branches of the service. It is a beautiful reminder of all of those who have served our country. The pool was built on the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad property. Next year is the 50th anniversary of the Brainard Swimming Pool. It was dedicated on June 23, 1974. It was the first stainless steel pool in the state and has a capacity of 140 swimmers. Not very often that they reach that. It's hard to believe that our kids were lifeguards that many years ago, and we are so thankful that the community has maintained the pool all of these years, and the volunteers work to update the pool. It is a great place to cool off on a hot summer day and provides employment for local students. Evergreen Court is an apartment complex composed of 8 one-bedroom apartments. It is government-assisted elderly and low-income housing. It was built by John Bruner in 1979 and is now owned by the Shooting Bee Properties. Now this is the west side of Main Street. We're looking from the north end to the south, and you see what was Kugler Hardware, the former post office, Joe Dufek's store, and Jacob Horacek's general store. Now this is the present picture of the west side of Main Street. We'll visit each one of these stores beginning at the south end. The old post office was located on the north side of East Business Block near the Talbot Hotel before it was moved to Madison Street. This is Kugler's Hardware, 1910 to 1973. It was located here after several other businesses in the early 1900s. John Kugler operated a harness shop in back and a shoe repair shop. There was a hand hardware store in front until 1974 and a post office next door. I can remember in high school going into Kugler's, and they had the most beautiful dishes sitting on tables in there, and all kinds of things that you'd find in a Walmart, but back then it was Kugler's Hardware. Now, the new post office is located in the location of the old post office and Kugler's. Both were raised in 1974 for the construction of the present post office. John Bruner, great-grandson of Anton Bruner, who built many of the buildings in early Brainard, built the post office. Dwayne Rasky served as a rural mail carrier for 45 years. Dwayne is on the left. Kay Russo was the postmaster, and she's fourth from the left. And Elsie DeWarrick served many years also, second from the right. The picture was taken when Kay was installed as postmaster. Our present postmaster is Denise Robeson. The next building to the north had its beginning in 1900 when Anton Bruner constructed the building where Joe Dufek and Sons had a combination grocery store, meat, clothing, and hardware store. They also did plumbing and heating as well as maintained the general store. Charlie Divish operated a furniture store here for a time, and Jacob Divish operated a furniture store here too for a while. Jacob Horacek also operated a general store here. I guess in those days, if they didn't know what to call it, they called it a general store. Later in history, M&P Quality Home Builders occupied the south half of this building and began their business in 1977. They have constructed many homes and remodeled many in the area. Owners of the business were Stephen Makovica and Dwayne Pallon. Both have retired, but Dwayne and his wife Kathy keep busy with odd jobs and other local projects. B&R came into being when Ron Benish and Larry Rezak operated a heating and air conditioning business until 1982. Pictured are Ron and his son-in-law, Ronnie Semron, who helped Ron for a while. Ron Benish has continued to operate the business as Ron's Heating, Plumbing, and Air Conditioning. At the present time, he has the help from his grandson, Trev Semrod. And I had the pleasure of having Ron Benish take out a sink this afternoon. He's laying there on the floor, and he couldn't get it out. He says, I put it in here, it ought to come out. Anyway, CTF Service is owned and managed by Tyler Fordig. He opened his business in March of 2000. CTF stands for Car, Truck, and Farm Vehicle Service, and most of his customers are from the Brainard area. Previously, this site was the Folk home. Holoshuski Mortuary spent many years in the building on Main Street. Otto and Lillian lived in the house next to it and provided funeral services in eastern Butler County. The building is presently owned by Norman and Denise Bruner. Otto was also affiliated with Robert's Funeral Home in David City until 1994 when he passed away. Prior to this location, Otto and Lillian had purchased the home across the school that belonged to the Cabela's and operated a mortuary there. The GA Folk Store, generally known as the Old Popular Corner. Some of the older people remember going in there with a couple of pennies to get candy after church or school. You could buy 2 for a penny and had a great variety to choose from. Another bargain in town was the nickel ice cream cone at Pitlick's. Okay, now we're going to go to 1928, where Charles and Louis Novak purchased the bank and in 1967 moved the bank to its current location. It became the first Nebraska bank in 1985. The neighboring Smersh drugstore was purchased at that time. It is now affiliated with the First Nebraska Bank of the Valley, and it's 137 years old. An interesting note is that when the bank was started by Smith and McKnight in 1886, each contributed $750. Presently, the assets are close to $24 million. Diane Vanderslice operates the Brainard First National Insurance Company within the bank. Now we're going to the old Bruner building. The building that housed the IGA, the Byway, and Raider grocery store dates back to 1894, when it was built by Anton Bruner. Initially, the south half of the building was a saloon, the north half was a fire hall, city offices, insurance company, cream station, Cranberg drugstore, and residence was located upstairs. It finally became a grocery store when it was purchased by J.W. Rada in 1930. Dushotko IGA operated from 1958 to 1970, and then it became the Byway. Bernice Swanda was manager from 1979 until it was sold at auction in 2002. Ray Bohach started Grandpa's Grocery, and his son Jason had Bohach Construction in the north part. The building burned and then was torn down in 2005. It was a Brainard landmark for 111 years. The area is now owned by Dave Farrell. Shortly after the Nebraska Central Railroad began operation, Santa's reindeer were busy, so he rode the train and stopped in Brainard to visit the children before Christmas. He's pictured here in the Brainard Fire Hall. Do any of you remember that? Am I the only one that does? Anyway, the Nebraska Central Railroad started in 1993 after the Union Pacific abandoned the lines. The company is based in Columbus and features bright Husker red engines. The majority of its business is agricultural based. It stops at Yanka and at Brainard and hauls many loads of grain from Frontier Co-op, and it drives my dog nuts. In the middle of the night, he hears the train, he's out of his bed, he's up and down the hall barking. Anyway, this is a picture of the train depot that served the Union Pacific for many years. Later, the Union Pacific abandoned the line. The photo shows where the original line ran between Brainard and headed south to Valparaiso. It's now Oak Creek Trail. It is supervised by the Lower Platte South Natural Resources. So get your hiking shoes on and head into the beautiful scenic walk through eastern Butler County. Big Five Flour Mill was known as the Brainard Roller Mills and built in 1897 by W.C. Norton. A new mill was built in 1908 to replace the original one destroyed by fire. In 1923, the business was purchased by Tom and Howard Wright and served a wide area with Big Five Nebraska flour. It was the last active flour mill in Butler County and closed in 1974. My husband frequently reminds me that he worked there for quarter an hour or something like that? Okay. Well, then the other day at PT, I was talking to Dawn Dwispler Kaborik, and They had found this in the basement of the house that they had purchased from Ernie Kaborik. And originally it was owned by Ray DeWarrick. Guessing this probably was about 1914 or very early, that this bag, and she gave it to me and said, guard it with my life. So anyway, then we move on to Fox-built feeds. In 1987, Howard Wright mentioned how bad business was to a farmer. He said, don't lay a dollar bill on the table or you're going to own a flour mill. A few days later, Ray and Gary Kuchera came back to see if it was a serious deed. Ray gave him a silver dollar and the mill was his. And that was in the paper, so I didn't make it up. It was raised and the site was cleared within a year. Now we go on to the farmer's elevator, and that's the way it looked like when it was established in 1915. At a special meeting, when those attending excuse me, decided to build a new 34,000 bushel facility at the cost of $9,000. 34 farmers and businessmen subscribed for shares in the company of $100 per share. The purpose of the first elevator was to provide grain storage, fertilizer, farm chemicals, feed, hardware, coal, and even a lumber yard. As time passed, a concrete elevator was constructed in 1954 and another in 1977. Additional office space and meeting rooms were added, and it is a very nice facility in Brainard. Now we're looking at the metal storage bins. This is a picture that was taken with a drone or from the top of the elevator, I don't know. But anyway, in 2010, the Brainard complex was built, and now they provide 2.3 million bushels of grain, anhydrous, agronomy services, and dry fertilizer. Gas pumps are available in Brainard and Dwight 24 hours a day and in 20 other locations. The home office is in David City. In Lincoln, excuse me. I knew I was going to say a little something there. Anyway, the first Holy Trinity Church, the masses were held in residence of the Czech pioneers in 1887, and they were immigrants from Bohemia and Moravia. Most of the construction of the first church was completed by the parishioners. The first Mass was celebrated by Father Stutz on June 10th, 1888, which happened to be Trinity Sunday, possibly the reason for the name. On June 6, 1906, the cornerstone of the new church was blessed by Bishop Bonneken. A day of celebration followed with a mile-long parade, brass bands, and festivities. The Gothic structure was completed for $47,000, and that included adjacent property and the contents. The first Mass was offered on December 20th, 1908. The old interior remained until 1970, when an extensive remodeling project under the leadership of Father Michael Dankel was held to meet the new liturgical requirements. The cost was $36,000 and included removal of high altars, communion rails, and many of the statues. Several restoration projects have been completed within the church, including new altars, return of the original Holy Trinity statue, new carpeting, woodwork, basement repair, shingles, and extensive painting. Father Aloysius B. Klein served as pastor for 56 years. He organized various societies and conducted numerous religious activities. He was a talented beekeeper and wrote many scholarly books about agriculture. Monsignor conducted a vigorous fundraising campaign for building construction, including the school built in 1916. The school was staffed by Notre Dame nuns for many years. It was demolished after 65 years of use, and the area is now a grassy lot. The rectory was built in 1928 and is the home of our present pastor, Father Stephen Snitling. The latest addition to the complex is the Klein Center, which was dedicated in memory of Monsignor Klein on the parish's centennial on May 29, 1988. The building is used for CCD, Knights of Columbus, PCCW, quilters, parish dinners, and lots of other activities. Thank you so much for attending our historical program. We decided to use past and present. We want to invite you to the activities that are planned this summer. I hope you picked up one of the flyers in the back. Also, check the Brainard website for the Brainard Clipper written by Debbie and Kevin Beanie for the last 22 years. Thanks also to Jean Hine for scanning the pictures and helping with the program. Thank you to Norman and Denise for sharing their collection of historic items at the library during the past month, and they brought it here also. Please stop at the City Hall in Brainard during business hours. We have DVDs for sale, the Q125 books for $10, they're a bargain, and a few Centennial books for $30. You can either call Carolyn, myself, or the First Nebraska Debt. Thank you again for your great attention, and don't forget to come June 26th to see Garrison. Are there any questions? No.
Does anybody have any questions? Well, stay up here, ladies. We want to give you a little something, and I want to get a picture of you. You can stand there, because I got to do everything around here.
I'm so humble too. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Carolyn and Sharon. My God. And your speakers were fabulous. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful program, and with gratitude, what Steve Barling gave them was certificates of appreciation and a 2-year membership to the Butler County Historical Society. I want you to know that there are 2 programs in June. 2. Nothing in July. So the next program will be about the history of Garrison. Jim Darrow and Barb Darrow Ingerson will be the presenters. The date of the program will be June 26th. So again, 2 programs in June, no programs in July. And if you sign up as you leave out at the table, then we'll know how many are coming and how many chairs to set up, and it really helps us. And if you don't get it signed up, you can always call the library and register there. And if you still don't do that, we'll still set a chair up for you. So in July, we take a break. But that's okay, because there's the Butler County Fair, and there is the 150th anniversary celebration for the town of David City, and that is being put on by the Friends of David City, and I encourage you all to attend that. It's July 28th, 29th, and 30th, downtown David City, and in the park, I believe, as well. Also, Butler County Historical Society Museum, the Depot Museum, is open every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, from 1 to 4. I encourage you to go out. The volunteers work very hard to set up a really nice display, and it looks great, and they would love to have you come visit. And I want to say thank you to the Hreshka Memorial Library for working the sign-in table, supplying water, taking registrations, helping to promote the event, and providing the display cabinet at the library. Every month, a month before the program, the presenters fill the display cabinet at the library with memorabilia about their town. And it's really beautiful, so stop by the library and take a look at it. Thank you, Jackie Mashek. You do such a nice job with the collages. Steve Barleen, Mark Doling for filming the program. And the Event Center treats us really well. They help us work out all the kinks for setting up the audio visual. We appreciate that. Everybody who runs the tables back there and the library's table. And of course, thank you guys for coming out, because this is really cool that you come every time. We'd miss you if you didn't come. So Thank you. Drive safely. Have a good night.